Hey everyone, have you ever thought about how World War I is often summed up as starting with just one gunshot in Sarajevo? You know, when Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated, and that set off a chain of alliances that led to millions of deaths in the trenches. But what if I told you the real trigger wasn't a bullet at all? It was something much more powerful. A checkbook. Imagine a small group of bankers meeting in smoky rooms from London to New York, scribbling out loans worth billions in today's dollars. These loans turned a small fight in the Balkans into the deadliest conflict in human history. And get this, they funded both sides of the war. Stick around, because by the end, you'll understand why your history books left this out, and how it still affects the war debts we deal with today. All right, let's go back to 1914. Europe was like a ticking time bomb. Strong feelings of nationalism were everywhere. Armies were showing off their strength. And yes, that assassination in Sarajevo lit the match. But if you look past the propaganda posters, you'll find something far more dangerous. A hidden financial competition that had been building for years. I'm talking about empires buried under mountains of debt from grabbing colonies, a gold standard system straining under the pressure of industrial growth, and secret agreements that weren't really about drawing borders. They were about making money. Picture this scene. Britain and France, the old powers, controlled huge colonies in Africa and Asia, pulling in resources like rubber and oil to fuel their factories. But they were in deep financial trouble, owing huge amounts from endless adventures overseas. Germany, the rising industrial giant, arrived late to the colonial game and was scrambling for pieces in places like Morocco and the Middle East to power its steel production. Meanwhile, Russia and Austria-Hungary, these crumbling empires, were borrowing just to hold their diverse populations together. And who was pulling the strings? Not kings or emperors, but big banks in London, like the Rothschilds, Barings, and Morgans, lending money at sky-high rates that would shock even a loan shark. By 1914, the world's economy was a fragile network tied to the gold standard. Every country's money was backed by actual gold, so any disruption, like trade problems or tariffs, could cause gold to flow out like blood from a wound. These imperial rivalries weren't just about pride. They were crucial for survival. For example, when Britain blocked German ships in the North Sea, it wasn't just a naval move. It was cutting off Germany's exports, which wrecked their banks. And here's the shocking part we're exploring today. These financial fights didn't just make war seem unavoidable. They actually paid for it. Think about JP Morgan's huge $500 million loan to the Allies, which pushed the US away from staying neutral, or Germany's desperate grabs for gold from its own partners. But did these bankers know the horror they were unleashing? Or was it just business as usual? Hold on, because the evidence is coming, and it's crazier than you might think. The key moment that changed everything is hidden deeper than a battlefield trench. Let's start at the beginning. Imperialism wasn't some heroic mission for glory. It was basically a way to grab cash. By the late 1800s, Europe's major powers had divided Africa like a holiday feast. Britain took Egypt and South Africa for cotton and gold. France claimed parts of China for rubber. Germany joined late, grabbing places like Tanzania and Namibia for minerals. Why? Their factories were running nonstop, making steel and weapons, but they needed cheap materials to stay profitable. Colonies provided almost free labor, captive markets, and raw goods shipped back home. But here's the big problem, and it's a huge one. Building these empires cost a fortune. Think railways through jungles, forts in deserts, and fights with local people who resisted. All paid for by governments, which meant borrowing massive sums from private banks. Britain, the so-called empire on which the sun never set, owed billions in bonds by 1900, a lot of it to those top London banks. The Rothschilds with their global network, Barings who'd just survived a big debt crisis in Argentina, and JP Morgan in America, eyeing Europe like a treasure chest. These weren't fair public loans. They were special deals backed by future taxes from colonies. France, after pushing into North Africa, left its banks worried about debts that turned empires into cash machines for lenders. Germany felt the pressure most. Unified in 1871, they were playing catch-up, with a navy budget exploding to match Britain's, while their colonies barely broke even. By 1913, Germany's foreign debt reached 20 billion marks, flowing through the Reichsbank and private firms like Deutsche Bank. Russia, under Tsar Nicholas, borrowed from French banks to build up against the Ottomans, piling up 6 billion francs in bonds that made St. Petersburg dependent on Paris. It sounds like a wild game of Monopoly, doesn't it? But this debt pile was unstable. High tariffs sparked trade fights. Britain's isolation meant squeezing Germany's exports, which drained Berlin's gold supplies. One bad crop in the colonies or a rebellion in India, and the whole system could collapse into default. These issues bred fear. Kaiser Wilhelm II wasn't just worried about being surrounded. He feared bankruptcy if Britain cut off his African resources. And the banks? They thrived on it. More tension meant more loans and higher profits. By 1914, Europe's economy was like a house of cards, with every leader owing money to the same lenders. But how did this lead to total war? Enter the gold standard. The invisible chains that made rivalries a matter of life or death. Take a deep breath. The gold standard might sound dull, like something from an economics class, but it was the financial disaster waiting to happen that locked Europe into war. Since the 1870s, major countries tied their money to gold. A pound, a mark, or a franc could be exchanged for a set amount of gold. This kept trade smooth and prices steady, until it broke down. Why? Gold is limited. Wars, famines, or strikes that slowed mining or trade caused gold to leave, leading to currency crashes and panic. Britain held 40% of the world's gold in 1914, thanks to mines in South Africa and Australia. Germany struggled with half-empty vaults after building its navy. When crises hit, like the 1911 Agadir incident over Morocco, where France and Germany almost fought over minerals, gold fled. Banks raised interest rates to bring it back, and credit dried up for farmers and businesses. Imagine a baker in Berlin unable to borrow because the Kaiser's navy drained the reserves. This wasn't just theory. It caused real pain. Unemployment rose, food riots started, and the solution? More colonies for more gold. But colonies were a zero-sum game. Taking Morocco meant France borrowed more from Rothschilds to arm up. Now, add in the secrets. You might think alliances were simple agreements, but they were hidden deals in sealed envelopes. Bismarck's 1887 reinsurance treaty with Russia, kept secret to avoid alarming Austria, promised neutrality unless France was attacked. By 1915, the Treaty of London bribed Italy with Austrian land and a $50 million loan to switch sides. And the Sykes-Picot Agreement secretly divided Ottoman territories for oil after victory. These weren't diplomacy. They were investments in violence, with banks backing the bonds. Germany, left out, turned inward, lending to Austria-Hungary and taking 71% of their debt by 1918, while emptying their gold reserves. It was like a financial parasite. Berlin funded Vienna's war while stealing bullion for itself. The tragedy hits hard. Millions died in battle, but it was gold traders in Frankfurt making the calls. If this story of gold and greed is making you angry, good, because we're halfway through, and it gets even more twisted. One American banker made a loan so huge it didn't just pay for the war. It dragged a neutral nation into the fight. Who was it? And what happened next? You won't believe the name. If this tangled web of money and selfishness is blowing your mind, showing how a few wealthy people turned competitions into rivers of blood, do me a favor, hit that like button if you're fired up about these secret schemes, and subscribe for more untold history that textbooks ignore. Turn on notifications, because next time, we're diving into the banker's playbook. Your support helps keep these truths out there. Thanks for sticking with me so far. Now let's finish pulling apart the thread that tore the world apart. All right, time to reveal the big twist. Enter J.P. Morgan Jr., the giant of Wall Street who made neutrality a joke. When war broke out in 1914, America was meant to stay out. President Wilson talked about peace, and the public agreed. But Morgan saw a chance for profit. From the start, his company became the Allies' main supplier. $3 billion in weapons, food, and steel, all handled through J.P. Morgan and Company. That's over $80 billion in today's money. A single 1915 loan of $500 million to Britain and France was the largest foreign bond sale ever. Rothschilds in London helped, sending money to keep Paris going. Why take the risk? Neutrality didn't matter. Morgan's team knew a German victory would mean lost debts. By 1916, Britain was funding everyone. Italy's full costs, 2/3 of France and Russia's gold reserves gone, overseas investments sold, private credit maxed out. Then came the U.S. Morgan pushed Wilson, arguing that an Allied defeat would hurt American trade. Later investigations showed these loans tied America's hands. Defaulting on Morgan's billions would cause economic ruin. So in 1917, American troops sailed over, not just for freedom, but to protect Wall Street's books. Germany fought back with secret deals, like gold shipments from the Ottomans and 3.5 billion marks in loans to Vienna. But it failed. The Reichsbank printed more money. Inflation rose, and new central banks like the 1913 Federal Reserve stopped gold exchanges, creating unlimited debt. The war cost $28 billion total. Taxes paid little. Bonds were sold on patriotism, bought by grandmothers and kids. But who profited? Morgan and Rothschild houses collected fees while the poor filled the trenches. It's heartbreaking, right? Soldiers wrote about mud and lost friends, but back home, bankers celebrated with victory loans. The toll, 16 million dead, empires destroyed. Yet the financial system lived on. The US became the top lender. Britain lost its crown but kept scheming. This wasn't random. It was planned. As the guns quieted in 1918, the books didn't balance. They shattered the world. The Treaty of Versailles wasn't real peace. It was a debt trap that led to Germany's inflation and Hitler's rise. That Sarajevo bullet was the spark, but the true fight happened in bank vaults, where gold beat glory and loans outlived lives. We've glorified the trenches, but the real nightmare is here. Ordinary people, like your great-grandfather, suffering in the mud for profit sheets. Next time someone says the war to end all wars, remember it created modern finance. The Rothschilds and Morgans didn't shoot guns, but their pens drew maps of misery. Today, we see echoes in sanctions, IMF rescues, and more. If this changed how you see history, leave a comment. What shady financial tricks have you noticed in today's conflicts? Subscribe, we're just starting. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay skeptical. History isn't done, it's financed.